Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer. This is their part number LB4322-400 and a 604 finish. Let's take a closer look at it. These hinges are sold as each. When you buy one, you're purchasing one hinge. If you were to purchase two, it's possible that they'll come packaged in one box, just to put that out there. Now, 604, that's going to give you a zinc dichromate finish, which is a corrosion-resistant plating on the hinge, on the bare steel, that will look like brass. Although it's not really a uniform brass, but it is a gold tone. So you'll see these hinges all the time installed on doors, and people will say that they're brass, and sure, they're certainly brass colored, but it's zinc dichromate is what that actually is. Now, let's take a further look at this hinge. Okay, now Bommer is a manufacturer of several different types of spring hinges as they relate to both commercial and residential doors, and the part number really infers what type of hinge that you're dealing with. LB stands for lube bearing. It's a reference to the construction of their spring hinges. Has a bearing construction with this wafer that you see here and here that is substantial in its ability to resist wear and tear long term. And the part number that follows, the LB, the 43, is going to give you a spring hinge, certainly, but the last two digits, the 22 in this case, really tell you what you're dealing with. Now, what you're dealing with is a confluence of several components that make up the physical properties or the dimensional properties of this hinge. First of all, the 5/8 radius on both leaves. That's part of the part number. The actual location of these screw holes is also part of the part number. The link to the template is down below this video that will give you the dimensional properties of all of that information. And don't order this hinge until you've double-checked if you're replacing a hinge, because there are several variations on spring hinges as they relate to residential applications, or at least wood doors and wood frames. That's where you'd see this. There's a video down below this video that tells you how to identify the spring hinge that you have. So the template and the video will be important. Also to note, this leaf thickness is 96 thousandths of an inch. So that's considered residential grade, meaning you would not want to mix and match this with a hinge that would be thicker, like 130 thousandths. If you have a residential application, it's possible you have two of these hinges and then a standard hinge that came with the door originally. And if that's the case, and you're replacing this one of these hinges or two of them, well, then you've found it. We do get folks that call and want to buy the non-spring hinge version of this hinge size, and the 4322 is listed as compatible with Permador. Permador is the manufacturer. Now, we don't have access to Permador non-spring type hinges, so if that's what you're replacing and you are not able to find one, the only thing we can help you with is just selling you all spring hinges, would be the case. Okay, now, the template we've discussed, you'll want to review that. The next part of the part number is the size. The 400 means that this hinge is 4-inch tall and 4-inch wide. And those dimensions are when the hinge is laid open in front of you. It's important to know the size of the hinge and to know that the 4x4, 4-inch by 4-inch, means the first dimension is the height, then the width. That's important to know because you could have hinges that are rectangular and not square like a 4x4 hinge. Just be mindful that the height is the first dimension should it ever come up. You don't want to order a hinge that would be 4.5 by 4 thinking that the 4.5 was the width like doors are, and then prep yourself for 4-inch tall hinges when it's really 4.5 by 4. Okay. This hinge is available in lots of different finishes, and I really wouldn't call 604 a finish because it's just a zinc dichromate, but you'll be able to order this in actual finishes such as prime coat, just a prime coat if you're going to paint them, bright black japanned. 603 is a zinc plated, which will be a chrome type color. 604 is the zinc dichromate, which will be that brass type color. Polished brass, satin brass, satin brass blackened and relieved, which would be like an antique brass. A bright bronze, very uncommon. A satin bronze. Antique brass and antique bronze. 639 is satin bronze itself. 640 is oil rubbed bronze. 643 is the next finish. Those are the codes. Satin bronze blackened. Some of these finishes I've actually never seen. Bright nickel, satin nickel. You can do a antique nickel. A nickel plated blackened. Polished chrome, satin chrome. So lots of different finishes you can do on this hinge. Be mindful of that. Your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your nickels, your satin, your polished, oil rubbed as well. Now below this video is a series of bullet points that will define the hinge. It's obviously fire rated. Heavy duty is actually what this hinge is. They're non-handed. They can be installed for doors that swing this way or doors that swing this way. You can turn them over if you want as well. Again, intended for permadoor. This will be compatible with other butt hinges that are between 0.085 and 0.109 leaf thickness. This is a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves there, and the swag is this detail where it is bent like this around the barrel, so that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and the frame. Okay. The reason they need to qualify the leaf thickness that this is compatible with is because you can't install this compatibly with thicker hinges, which I had mentioned before, because the door is not going to work right. Something's going to bind and pull on the hinge. Certainly prevent the hinge from operating correctly, meaning closing the door. 5/8 radius. That's really important. There are two radiuses. Well, there are two, 1/4 inch and 5/8. If it's like the size of a $50, you've got 5/8. If it's closer to the size of a dime, you've got 1/4 inch. Screw locations. Mentioned below on the template. Screws are included in a complementary finish. Now we get into the couple of things before we get into the application. There's a link below this video to the tension rod and the tension pin. That's what your tension rod looks like. For every order that you place, you'll get one tension rod for sure. For every hinge that you order, you'll get at least one tension pin. This client's order has 2 pins on it, so there are 2 hinges on it, so there are 2 pins. If you need one of those in the future, you can order them from those links. Now we get into where you use these, when you use these. Obviously a residential door that you want to be self-closing, such as the front door of a 3-flat apartment building. You want that front door and that back door closing all the time because you probably have an electric strike that is controlled by an intercom. You could have a fire-rated garage door, attached garage in a home. That's a 20-minute door that needs to be self-closing. You'll see a spring hinge in that application. Some people put them on their front doors as well. You just want the door to close behind you. There are 2 links below. Certifications and hinge selection guide. And then there's installation instructions. Let's look at the former. So in a 4-inch hinge, if your door is up to 85 pounds, go with 2 spring hinges. And if your door is heavier than that, 110-pound range, go with all 3. And you can mix and match those with appropriately sized butt hinges. Now, I'm a fan of all spring hinges, and it's not because I'm a spring hinge distributor as much as my experience tells me that the spring hinge's ability to close the door is based on having enough stored energy in the spring so that when the door is open and you release the door, that energy is being released. You like to have as much residual energy, especially at the closing cycle of the door, so that the door gets not only closed but also latched. The latch bolt is going to hit that strike plate and have to overcome that. The door surface area itself will have to overcome all that surface area. And sometimes you'll get yourself into a scenario where you have to set the tension so high on the spring hinge to get it to move quickly through the opening just so that it can slam or limp all the way closed. That's not really a reliable long-term solution because it will degrade the integrity of the frame over time as well. So if you have that problem, add another spring hinge and set that tension, middle hinge, bottom hinge. The top hinge, if there are 3, make that one the last that you'll really use, because that hinge will actually do the least amount of spring closing work, because the top hinge is actually holding about 70% of the entire door weight. So your middle and bottom will be the hinges to manipulate, but use that top hinge as well to help get some stored energy so that you've got, I liken it to a tugboat. They don't go very fast, but they can pull a lot of weight, and that residual stored energy at the end of the closing cycle is like having more of a tugboat, so to speak. You want that door to close reliably without slamming. You don't want it to slam and then bounce back open. Spring hinges, you know, when used properly, and if you're on the borderline, opt for another spring hinge. It's better safe than sorry, because you can set it where there is no tension, and then let those hinges share that load equally among them so that you're not stressing any one spring hinge. If you hear creaking when it opens, especially if it's a new hinge, older hinges will creak because of oxidation on the spring, which you can lubricate, by the way. That wouldn't be a problem just to coat that. But if you hear creaking in a new installation, that means, and you've got lots of settings on the spring tension, that's an indication you've got too much tension on the spring. Now, speaking of that, the link to the certifications really just talks about the quantity of spring hinges based on door weight, but also door size, not to exceed 3 foot by 7 foot, you know, for that table, unless you're going to go with something up to 4 foot by 7 foot, but you're adding an additional spring hinge, at least one. There is then a link below this video to a document called Installation Instructions, and that's going to tell you that when your door is open to 90-degree, maximum tension is 4 holes, and we're going to go over that in a moment. If you get to 180 degree, just 3 holes of tension. Now, let's go over setting tension. You will install this without any tension on the spring hinge at all. Get your door hung. Then, take the tension rod, and when the tension collar is pointed towards the top, insert it into one of these holes, and then simply turn it clockwise. 1 hole, 2 hole. If I were to put one of those tension pins into that second hole, I'll then retain tension on that, and then I can move my tension rod over, crank it a third, possibly a 4th time, and reposition that tension pin. And that's how you set the tension on these. So you need the tension rod and the tension pin, and I would strongly urge you to purchase tension pins from the factory and not make them yourself. Because some people will take a small, like a 4, maybe a 6 penny nail, and cut them with end cutters. Well, the end of that pin is going to be quite sharp, and there's been, believe it or not, instances where people have been harmed by making contact maybe with their back with that pin hanging out, and they've scratched themselves and damaged themselves to the point of lawsuit. So be mindful of using material correctly when it comes to those tension pins, because they do stick out of the end of the hinge. We've talked about the settings, how many holes of tension you can achieve. Now you can turn that hinge again upside down. If you're going to do that, just rotate the tension collar counterclockwise if you're going to turn it upside down, and you'll be in good shape with all of that sort of work. Now finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the Bommer, their part number LB4322, 400-640, pardon me, 604 spring hinge and a zinc dichromate, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.